Welcome everyone to the SAICE CEO Podcast. Today's guest is a trailblazer, an innovator, a woman I admire greatly who's been in the industry for quite a long time and who's a great mentor within the industry. Her name is Malani Padayachee-Saman, and I am really honored to have you with us here today, Malani.
Sakadi, it's actually absolutely wonderful being here, especially as we going into celebrating Women's Month. Thank you for affording me the opportunity to be present.
Malani, you've led with vision in spaces where women, and especially women of color, are not seated at the table. You've founded and led MPAMOT. You have won international and national awards. What has been the founding value that has driven you towards this intentional leadership?
Sakadi, looking back, I think the thing that stands out, I think, most prominently is the fact that I built my leadership skills around the fact that I first ensured that professionally I was competent and placed a lot of emphasis on that. And I think that's certainly held me in good stead over the years. When I look back and I look back to my early, young professional sort of career, I think it wasn't an easy journey, but being exposed to individuals that were a lot more competent than I was, one had to obviously prove yourself in the sector. And having done that, I think you often won the respect of many individuals as a result of that. That certainly kind of provided me with a very solid foundation to be able to grow from. And I think as the journey progressed, I think it's been an issue of ensuring that you bring your true self to the party. I think being truly authentic in what you do is important. And I think as professionals, and more importantly, professionals in the built environment space, bringing that into the room actually adds immense value. Particularly, we are inherently as females, we appropriately equipped to understand the needs of people, and more importantly, our stakeholders and clients. So that certainly adds immense value. And I think from a leadership perspective, I certainly was challenged. As you are aware, 5 years ago, effectively, this August would be 5 years, following the acquisition of the local office of Matt McDonald. I was certainly challenged from a leadership perspective because you obviously on this journey and you're doing what you think is right and correct, and you have people, you're surrounded by people that are actually delivering. So it enhances, in terms of what your true value is to the profession, to your business. I think the journey following the acquisition, effectively this August would be 5 years since we acquired the local office of Matt McDonald. The leadership required during that time was certainly very unique in many respects, particularly because we had the impact of COVID. Yes. And I must admit, the 100-day CEO plan following the acquisition, I literally had to rip it up and throw it away and start from, basic understanding of what would be required. So I think bringing in a bit of agility and during that period certainly bode well.
You're quite globally recognized for championing gender mainstreaming. Can you maybe give us examples of the work that you're doing around this area in particular?
It's true. I think, I've often indicated that it's really, it's not about gender empowerment, but really about gender mainstreaming. And it's so important if we want change in the industry or sector, it's important that we have the men in the room. I've always said that, and I still maintain that, that is definitely important. However, I do think that, we need to be a bit more deliberate in what we do when we speak gender mainstreaming. I think there's remarkable examples, both particularly internationally, in terms of the strides that are being made in this respect. I know that we don't necessarily have enabling policies in country to be able to ensure that we get the traction that we would require. However, I've made a deliberate attempt, and I think I've shared it just locally with colleagues in the industry, and more importantly, globally as well. And I'm hoping that that would gain traction. And I think just sharing it, and I know I've shared it with you previously, but I think it's important for the audience to also understand where I'm coming from. So like we have, and it is actually by law that we should be doing it, where we share a safety moment at the start of our meetings, I've introduced in all of our meetings that we share a diversity moment. I mean, we have such a rich culture, we have such a lot to share, particularly in the sector. And more importantly, I think it's also about ensuring that we are sensitizing our male counterparts around a lot of matters. So what we do is we share a diversity moment within our organization, and I encourage you to do the same. And generally, the diversity moment could cover anything from gender, generational, and also cultural. And it's amazing how much we've learned over the years about each other as a result of this very deliberate attempt at connecting with people.
I was quite privileged last year to accompany you to one of your mega projects, and you've been winning a lot of awards for some of the infrastructure work that you're doing as MPAMOT. And we've seen that infrastructure can either be a bridge or a barrier. So how would you then, taking on your mindset around gender mainstreaming, how do you then incorporate that into inclusive design in the infrastructure projects that you are rolling out as a company?
I'm glad, Sukadi, you mentioned our trip last year and your exposure to the Lesotho Highlands project. In fact, I think we were very, very fortunate that as a result of the acquisition, there were two projects that actually came across with the transaction. The first being all of the enabling works associated with the project, which we have been actively involved in. And it actually was one of the projects that were implemented during COVID. It was one of the very few projects that our organization were involved in during COVID. And despite the challenges that we had, we were able to actually deliver all of the enabling works that are now supporting three of the large infrastructure mega projects that are currently being implemented in Lesotho. And we also in a joint venture with on the dam project, so that's quite exciting. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to actually take you through and show you what's happening out there in a very remote part of Lesotho. So it's these kind of engagements that actually encourage me in terms of what I do and how I do it. And I think it's often in this journey that it's important for us to possibly reconnect to what brought us here and what we're passionate about. So that's exactly what I do from time to time. And in fact, last week I was on a project site as well, which was very, very exciting, on our Redstone project, in which we are the lender's technical advisors. And that was amazing. It was actually very, very interesting to be on that site as well. Sakadi, I do believe that, when you look at projects and especially at inception stage, if we are to ensure that we're inclusive in all respects, not just on the gender side, I think it's important that you ensure that in project rollout that you have like diverse teams that are able to understand and pick up issues long before they actually materialize, and that are also conscious of what would be required from the integration of other disciplines. Because often we tend to, as engineers, focus on just what is our scope of works. But I think it's critically important to ensure that we're educated around disciplines that are integrated in terms of what we deliver. I've often encouraged that within our own organization, that our young professionals particularly need to be better informed around how we actually fit into the bigger picture and how we can support in an interdisciplinary kind of way. So, and I think when one looks at the rollout of projects, particularly in a rural context, I think I've shared with you that I've grown up in a rural community, and I actually come from Umzinto, which is on the lower south coast of Natal, or rather the lower south coast of KZN. And I mean, some of you probably would recognize it or recognize Scottsboro. So Umzinto was just 9 kilometers inland of Scottsboro. And I think having been raised in a rural community, I kind of am aligned to many of the challenges and issues that these communities faced. So I love working in rural communities, and I encourage my organization to do so. And I think that the impact that one can potentially have in such communities is huge. And even if it is a small intervention, the impact could be phenomenally big. And, the kind of issues that these communities face, it's important to unpack it and to be able to ensure that even in those situations, despite the fact that it might be a bit more complicated,
yes,
because we're still having a lot of gender-related issues. There's always, from a cultural perspective, there's huge challenges in those areas. So we do need to be mindful of that, and we need to be able to navigate those spaces effectively as professionals and deal with them. But I do think that in such instances, the difference that is made is largely due to the fact that one needs to kind of separate your professional standing from what would ordinarily be your social standing in those communities. And that makes a difference. And therefore, I often, when I speak to individuals that are actually interacting, and I don't think it's just a rural issue. I think it's an industry issue, that one needs to be able to be in a position to conduct yourself in a business-like manner when it's required, obviously in a business environment. But then beyond that, you are a mother, you're a wife, you're a sister. There's so many other roles that you play, and their perception of who you are and what you do should not necessarily be different. So I think we have, different roles. I often state that I literally feel that I've trained myself so well to have two brains, a work brain and a home brain. And
I remember you saying that,
Yeah, I've often stated that. And strangely enough, when I discuss this and I share this with other individuals, they feel that I'm probably the 1% of the population that's effectively been able to do that. But I think it's something that can be taught. I think it's something that can be picked up over the years. But it's also a very deliberate attempt at wanting to do that as well. That has resulted in that.
So let's talk then around your art and your engineering, because a lot of people don't know that you're also an artist. And how do you bring that creativity, that thought leadership, that social consciousness into the work that you do?
Okay, so let me just backtrack there, because I discovered my sort of, I wouldn't say it's quite a talent, but intuitively my kind of attraction to art occurred about, I think, 10 years ago, and it was quite by chance, where I enrolled myself onto a particular course, and I went on it, and I loved it. But I've been so fascinated ever since. And what I've also discovered, it's almost like my creative outlet. But amazingly enough, I often find that my best strategies and my best kind of problem solving is when I am doing something creative, or it's following when I've done something creative. And I think art does that to you, because there's so much about art that we've not even discovered. And I particularly like the Impressionists, and I like the way that they use natural light in different forms. I find it extremely intriguing. And there's so much of maths in art as well. I mean, the golden ratio, the way they drew you into their paintings, and there's a lot of theory around it as well. So I find that extremely fascinating. I love that the ability to be able to do things. I love landscapes and particularly seascapes, so that's my number one favorite. I wouldn't say that so one day I hope I would be some famous artist and be recognized, and I often say I would love to be.
Look at the projects you've done.
I
Like
know,
they are
it's changing
in themselves, you know?
I suppose they are. They really are, because two projects are the same. And
Yes. One of the things when I think of you, I also think about sustainability. And I know you're going to be in our civil talk soon. What does true sustainability look like in infrastructure in your mind? And how can we really focus on that or arch our way towards achieving that?
so, Cody, I think the word sustainability is generally used very loosely.
True.
And, and in my opinion, or what is my view on sustainability? It's purely about, in the projects that we deliver, it's not necessarily just as to whether we've looked at the project itself and looked at life of project. It's more than that. And I think it actually starts with us understanding why are we doing it in the first instance, and who are we doing it for, and how do we do it? Because we tend to implement projects because we think as professionals that's probably the best solution, but it might not necessarily be. And I think in many instances, and particularly in instances like for the provision of water is a prime example, we tend to service communities, but it's important that beyond the servicing of implementing of water infrastructure, that those communities are in fact able to pay for them, that they are in fact comfortable with the level of service that you provided. So the consultation around that, I think, is critically important at the outset. And more importantly, you also need to understand, beyond that, because in some instances, we tend to provide infrastructure in municipalities that are not necessarily maintaining the infrastructure beyond that. So what would be required to be able to ensure that that is continued? And we talk about like local economic development. We need to have plans as to how we actually do that effectively. We need to be training people, in particular areas, particularly with maintenance-related issues, and creating those opportunities for them as well. I also feel that, with sustainability comes long-term programs. The quick fixes really did not have the impact that that is expected. So you need to have like long-term programs that are coupled with not just the actual implementation of infrastructure, but also the skills and the training that would be required to maintain that infrastructure for long beyond what the design life is even. We are looking for opportunities to increase design life. So it would be important for us to consider what would happen beyond that. I also think that from a development perspective, it's important to frame sustainability, because what would be good in a rural context might not necessarily be appropriate in an urban context. So therefore, we need to have almost like fit-for-purpose solutions to ensure that we are actually implementing appropriately.
That is so awesome. And you do a lot of like international roles. Can you maybe like give us some insights into that? Because I'm sure there's a lot of advising that you do, at a macro level around Africa, around education, policy and the likes. Can you just maybe give us some more information on that?
Sakadi, I'm very fortunate to be included in two initiatives actually that I think has been quite phenomenal. The first being I'm part of the FIDIC Global Leadership Forum Advisory Board, and that's obviously certainly exposed me to what's happening internationally at a global level particularly in our sector. And I also feel that, as South African consulting practices, as South African professionals, we have so much to offer, and we often don't recognize the importance and the impact that this could potentially have, even in first world economies. I was fortunate enough, before starting out my own practice, I actually did work abroad in the UK. And when I got back, it was that confidence of having worked abroad, that it was that confidence that I developed in that experience that got me back to South Africa to start my own practice. And I just wish that every professional had an opportunity to even do a short stint, in a developed economy.
Yeah.
Because I am convinced that if they did that, they would be ever so eager to want to come back, because the challenges we have are huge, and we actually provide solutions with very limited resources, and that in itself is quite impressive. So I found that very encouraging in terms of what we do. But I also feel that we've, following our democracy, and this is my view on this, is that we've made huge strides in attempts to rectify the ills of the past, and therefore things like stakeholder engagement, making sure that we including communities in some of our decisions, etc., have been at the forefront of anything we've been doing. And therefore I feel that the kind of engagement and what's happening in developed economies in terms of the lobbying, etc., we've already been able to solve those issues. We have mechanisms and systems in place as to how we do that appropriately. So I think that there's a lot of value in what we do, and we can actually be, involving us in some of their challenges would really add value, in many ways, because of the complexities and what we've had to deal with. The other association that I'm part of is I'm actually on the advisory board of Construct Africa, and the reason why I accepted that particular appointment onto that board was largely because I do have a very strong Pan-African agenda, and I feel that obviously we're going to have the youngest youth population at the turn of this century will still be in Africa.
Yeah.
And I think that the skills that would be required in terms of infrastructure rollout is going to come from the continent. And it's important for us to recognize that, and it's important for us to also be gearing up to respond to that, that kind of narrative. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done. And I also believe that the skills that we would be actually training on the continent would be incredible because of the challenges we have. So the exposure into real situations, real challenges would be quite invaluable to the world.
Passion, Malani. I think you and I are motivated by similar passion, and maybe that's why I connect so deeply with you and what you say. So, unfortunately, I have to bring our conversation to a close, but in hindsight, looking back at your career, and if you had some words to leave to a young female engineer who's coming out of university, who is quite overwhelmed in the so-called male industry, what are some words of nuggets that you would leave with them?
Okay, that's an interesting one. If I were to look back, I think my first bit of advice would be make sure you focus on your career. Make sure you build a solid foundation. Professionally, you need to be extremely competent in what you do. I think that will command the kind of respect that you would be expecting in the industry as you progress. I think also if you would want to take a page out of my book, I think it would be important for you to be able to possibly implement what I did, because it's worked wonders. And I think if you are able to create those two brain syndrome, a work brain and a home brain, you'd certainly have a very balanced lifestyle. And I think, I attest that to the fact that I've been able to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is it from Malani Padayachee-Saman, an inspiration, a woman to really look up to, and one who really gives back to her community and has a social conscience, even as an engineer. Malani, thank you so much for joining us at this podcast. It has been a pleasure spending this last few minutes with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakadi. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.